Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together in Daf Mem Beis Amud Aleph. 10 lines from the top. The Mishnah was explained by Abaye that if a person has a meicham, a kettle, on top of a flame, and he removes that kettle on Shabbos, he cannot pour a little bit of cold water into that kettle because it'll mavashel the cold water and will be over an issur of bishul on Shabbos. However, he can take a lot of cold water and pour it once inside of that kettle because it will only warm up the cold water. Alternatively, he can take the contents of the water in the kettle, pour it into a kli sheni, and then pour even a little bit of cold water into that kli sheni because it will not mavashel, it will only warm up that cold water. Says the Gemara, bringing up Raisa now, Tonu Rabbanon, Noisen Adam Chamin l'toich hatzoinin. A person can take chamin, hot water that is at least yad soledes boy, and he can pour it into cold water. V'loi hatzoinin l'toich chamin. But he cannot put cold water and pour it into hot water. Divrei Beis Shammai. These are the words of Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai is of the opinion of tato govar. That means to say that the bottom, that which you're pouring into, will then overpower that which you're pouring in from. And therefore, in the Reish, the first part, you can take hot and pour it into cold because the cold will overpower the hot before it will then become nisbashel. Whereas the opposite case, where you pour in cold to hot, the hot will then overpower the cold and it will mavashel the cold. Those are the words of Beis Shammai. Now, Beis Shammai, indeed, we're talking about, as it will become clear shortly, that we're talking about that the kli below is a kli sheni. So that which you're pouring cold into a hot kli sheni, even though midiaraisa, it's not mavashel water, but Beis Shammai is strict over here and says that midirabanan, we have an issur because we're concerned that he might make a mistake and then confuse it in the future with a kli rishon. Ubeis Hillel oimrim, and Beis Hillel argues, bein chamin l'toichat soinein, bein sonein l'toichat chamin muter. Whether you pour hot into cold or cold into hot, it's going to be muter. Ba'med devar mamurim. What are we speaking about? Bekois. We're speaking about specifically a case of a kli sheni of a kois. Then Beis Hillel says that you can pour a cold into hot because the kois is a kli sheni, and also since a kois is used to be drinking from, you're not going to want that the water be scalding hot. So because of these two things together, Beis Hillel permits a person to pour tzoinin into chamim, even though again tato gavar. However, if it's talking about a bathtub, chamin l'toichat tzoinin v'lo tzoinin l'toichat chamin, only hot into the cold would be permissible, but cold into a hot bathtub, that would be prohibited. Now here we're talking about ambati, and ambati we're referring to as a kli rishon. So it has, let's say, hot water from Chami Tiveria, and it's in the ground, and therefore this kli rishon is mevashel, the cold water that you poured into. And here you have two things that are making it osir. One, because it's a kli rishon, and two, because you're going to be pouring only a little bit of cold water because you want that, make sure that the bath is hot since you want to bathe in it. Unlike the kois, where we said that you don't want to then be too hot because you want to drink from it. So therefore you'll make sure that the contents are not scalding. Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya oiser. Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya even oiser is what seems to be the first statement of Beis Hillel, that even pouring hot into cold would be oser. Omer Rav Nachman halacha Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya, and Rav Nachman rules that the halach is indeed like Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya, that it would be what seems to be saying that it would be also both to pour cold into hot and hot into cold. Says the Gemara, Sover Rav Yosef lemeimar, Sefel harehu ka'ambati. Rav Yosef thought to say that a sefel, A sefel would be like a bowl that a person uses to wash his hands and his feet and his face. That, he says, is considered to be like an ambati. Now, although a sefel is a kli sheni, an ambati, we said, is a kli rishon. Over here, because an ambati is used to bathe with, and you want scalding hot water, so he wants to compare the sefel to the ambati and say the sefel also has the same property as the ambati in that you require hot scalding water, whereby it would be prohibited to pour cold into a sefel. Omar le Abaye Tani Rebbe Chia sefel eino keambati. Abaye says that Rebbe Chia taught that a sefel is not like an ambati because it's only a kli sheni, and therefore it's not like an ambati, which is like a kli rishon, and therefore you would be permitted to pour from a cold into the hot sefel. Now ask the Gemara, what was the reason that Rav Yosef initially thought that you could compare a sefel to gambati? Ask the Gemara, Rav Nachman, halacha Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, and Rav Nachman said the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, that you're not allowed, that we understand at this point, to pour from cold into hot, not only cold into hot, but hot into cold. So therefore, how could we sustain such a suggestion that the sefel is like an ambati? Ela b'Shabbos rechita b'chamin leko. Shabbos, you would never then be able to then wash your hands, feet, and face. And we know that's permissible with water that was heated up before Shabbos. Although one cannot bathe his entire body, but his hands, feet, and face can be washed on Shabbos. And according to this, you would never be able to do so, because according to that which we saw, Rav Yosef suggesting that sefel is like an ambati, he's saying it would be also to pour hot into cold and cold into hot. Says the Gemara, no. Misavris Rabbi Shimon aseifa koi. Who said that Rabbi Shimon was referring to the seifa, meaning the statement that you can't pour hot into cold and not cold into hot? Areisha koi. He's referring to the reisha as follows. Ubeis Hillel matirin. Beis Hillel was matir. Bein chamin letoich tzoynein. Ubein tzoynein letoich chamin. Beis Hillel says it's mutter to pour both from chamin into tzoynein and tzoynein into chamin. Rabbi Shimon Nasya oiser tzoynein to chamin. Whereas Rabbi Shimon Nasya said the tzoynein to chamin is not mutter, that's osir. But of course he would agree that chamin into tzoynein would be mutter. So therefore one could wash his hands, face, and feet with hot water from a sefel. But if that's the case, the Gemara is saying if Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh indeed holds that he argues on Beis Hillel on these points and says that even soynein l'toich chamin in a kli sheni is going to be osir, then Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh da'amar k'Rabbi Shammai. Then that's going to then make Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh like saying like Beis Shammai against Beis Hillel. So the Gemara says that can't be. Hachikam, rather you have to say this is what he meant to say. Lo nechleku Beis Shammai u'Beis Hillel b'davar zeh. Even Beis Hillel, Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh suggests, even Beis Hillel agrees with Beis Shammai that you cannot pour hot into a cold kli sheni. For the same reason that we said above, because there would be concern that maybe you would then switch and make a mistake with a kli rishon. So not only is it prohibited to pour from a cold into a hot kli sheni, but even kli sheni hot into a cold would be osir. Om Rav Huna bereid Rav Yoshua chazina leile Rava de lo kapid amona. I saw that Rava was not makpid like Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh just ruled. Medetani Rabbi Chia noisen odam kiton shel mayim letoich sefel shel mayim bein chamin letoich tzoynein ubein tzoynein letoich chamin. Because Rabbi Chia taught, and this is what Rava's precedent was to understand based on what Rabbi Chia taught, that a person can put noisen odam kiton shel mayim. He can take a flask of water and he can put it into a sefel of mayim, chamim, in hot water, or if cold water into hot. Omar le Rav Huna le Rav Ashi. Now this is Rav Huna, not to be confused with what we saw 4 lines earlier, Rav Huna berei Rav Yoshua. This is different. This is Rav Huna. Rav Huna says to Rav Ashi, Dilma Shaini Hasam, the Mifsike Kli. Maybe there it's different in the case of Noisin Adam Kiton Shomayim Letoich Sefer Shomayim Ben Becham Ben Soinim, because he's putting the Kiton Shomayim, and therefore it has walls around it. That's why it's permitted. Omar Le, no, Me'ara Itmar. He taught Me'ara that he poured it in. That's what he meant when he said Noisein Adam Kiton Shomayim. He poured in, not that he put in, but he poured in the contents of the flask of water. Me'ara Adam Kiton Shomayim L'toich Sefer Shomayim Ben Bechamin L'toich Tzoinin Ben Tzoin L'toich Chamin. A person can pour the flask of water inside a sefer of water, whether it's hot into cold or cold into hot. So therefore we have a precedent, and indeed, like we originally understood Beis Hillel as saying, not like Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya, but indeed that you can pour cold, you can pour hot into cold, and it's not concerned, and even pour cold into hot when it's a kli sheni, and therefore both are mutter. The Gemara now brings a new Mishnah, ha'ilfas, a pan, v'hakedeira, and a pot, shehe'evira mirutochin, that was removed from the fire and is boiling, lo yiten lesoichon tavlin. It's hot enough that at least yatzel, let us go, maybe even boiling, and you cannot put, however, inside of it tavlin. You can't put spices, because now you have an ilfas or kedeira, that's a kli rishon, although it's removed from the fire, but it's still mavashel. Aval noisin hu letoich hakeora, or letoich hatamchui. But you could put the contents of the ilfas or the kedeira into the keora, into a plate, or into a serving plate, and then you can put your spices, because that's a kli sheni, and the kli sheni is not mavashel. Rabbi Yehuda oimer, lekol hu noisein, everything he can put the spices into, chutz midove sheyesh bo chometz v'tzir, with the exception of something that has vinegar or has juices from the fish, because that then exacerbates, that then causes the mevashel even stronger, and therefore that would be a problem even to put tavlin. So here we have a machloikis between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, the Gemara will explain what his position actually is, to be machmer or mekel, but he says when it comes to tavlin, you can put into the tavshil, however, so long as it doesn't have chometz or tzir.